have spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action. So for those of you who may not be aware, today on Capitol Hill, they had hearings about Facebook. A Senate committee called representatives of the Facebook app and questioned them harshly about the impact that their app, Facebook, is having on particularly young people and teenagers throughout the United States of America. And they talked about not just Facebook, but Instagram. And I guess it's been revealed that despite some of the negative mental health effects associated with Instagram, Facebook apparently tried to cover this up because they feared it would hurt their profits, and that their own internal research was showing that the app known as Instagram had a negative effect on the mental health of young people. And it was really interesting to listen to this hearing because I was hearing many Republicans, many Democrats as well, many conservatives asking very harsh questions of the woman who is the safety representative of Facebook, the head of the safety division of the Facebook Corporation. And they were saying to her, Facebook disregards public good in pursuit of its own profits. You knew that there were negative mental health effects associated with your app, but you covered it up because you were so determined to make money. Congressman after congressman, senator after senator is asking them these questions, laying it into them. At one point, I believe one representative said, IG stands for Instagram, but it also stands for intense greed. Intense greed. And they're castigating Facebook for the fact that it has had a negative mental health effect on our next generation. And they concealed this in pursuit of their own profits. And all of their research, they don't seem to be concerned about how young people are affected by their app, by Facebook, by Instagram. Rather, they're only concerned with making money. It was fascinating to hear this conversation, right? We understand that Facebook was about to roll out a special version of Facebook they were going to call Facebook Kids. That was only available to those 13 years of age or younger. And it was going to be a special Facebook. But now they've had to delay that, to postpone it, because there's been so much outrage showing that they were not trying to protect these younger people from some of the negative effects. In fact, they were doing the opposite. They were going to encourage these young children to set up accounts that their parents didn't know about, according to some allegations. They were going to try to use this app to direct young people to Instagram, to go from Facebook to Instagram. And I'm hearing these congressmen, congresswomen, Democrats, and very conservative Republicans, a lot of them, castigating Facebook. And I'm thinking to myself, it's almost frustrating. I don't know if any of you have ever felt this before, but sometimes when something needs to be said, but it's not being said, you're hearing a conversation, and there's something that needs to be said, but it's not being said, it can be the most frustrating feeling. And I'm hearing these congressional hearings. You cared only about your own profits. You put yourself, you're just like big tobacco. I'm hearing this and I'm saying, capitalism. 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 Because these are the same representatives, especially many of the Republicans, these are the same representatives that have been telling us that the market always has the best results, that have been pushing the economic theories of Ayn Rand, who talks about capitalism as the unknown ideal, of Milton Friedman, who says the market always brings the best result. And they're sitting there talking about how this huge multinational corporation put its own profits ahead of the public good, enriched itself at the expense of young people, concealed the negative results of its behavior from the public. And that's, again, it's right in front of them. It's right in front of their eyes. Capitalism. This is capitalism. That's what capitalism is. Capitalism is a society where profits are in command. Capitalism is an economy organized to make profits for private owners of the means of production. This is what capitalism is. Capitalism is the rule. I'm hearing them talk about this, and it's just infuriating to me. It's infuriating to me. No one will point out that capitalism is the problem. And in fact, these very same voices that are constantly telling us the merits of capitalism, constantly encouraging us to believe that capitalism is a great system, those very same voices are up there castigating a corporation. How dare this corporation put the interests of its own profits ahead of public? They don't care. Instagram stands for instant greed. But of course they have to have these hearings on Capitol Hill, because the reality of what is happening to the next generation of young people in the United States has to be addressed. Red states, blue states, green states, purple states. It's happening. Younger people in the United States are in crisis. And trigger warning, by the way. Trigger warning. I'm going to talk about some heavy stuff here today. But one thing that kept coming up at this congressional hearing was that 13% of young people in Britain who are suicidal and 6% of young Americans who are suicidal did Instagram, the app, as contributing to their desire to kill themselves. 13% of young people in Britain who are thinking about killing themselves said that Instagram contributed to it. And 6% of Americans who are thinking about, young Americans, teenagers, who are thinking about killing themselves, 6% said that Instagram, the app, contributed to that. Those are not small numbers. Those are definitely not small numbers at all. That's huge. Think about that. Think about that. That is a really big deal. 13% of British young people who think about killing themselves, and 6% of American young people who think about killing themselves, list Instagram as a contributing factor. That is not a joke. Those are numbers you can't mess with. And we all know the suicide rate right now is the highest it has been in decades, especially since the pandemic. It was already rising very significantly before the pandemic, and now since the pandemic, the suicide rate has been rising. There's a bit of a problem. There's a bit of a problem facing the country. Bit of a problem here. And you gotta love the projection. Are folks familiar with the concept of projection? Now, this is a Freudian psychoanalytical concept called projection. The idea is you see in other people things that you see in yourself but are concealing from yourself, right? If there's something about yourself, reading the Reconciliation Day, writing it down. If there's something about yourself that you don't like, you will hide it from yourself, not acknowledge it, but you will start to instead notice it in other people constantly. You constantly see other people having this flaw that you yourself are not able to acknowledge to yourself that you have. And a great example of projection is all the insane reporting I have seen about China's social credit system. I don't know if you've seen this, but apparently, according to all the reports, they have cameras watching everyone all the time, according to the reports, and everyone is constantly being judged by their actions. And if they do the right thing, they get more points, and if they do the bad thing, they get negative points, and everyone's actions are supposedly being monitored by the Chinese government. There is 24-hour surveillance of individuals, and everyone is being rated by how good they behave, and this isn't true. The social credit system basically doesn't exist the way they describe it, right? There are individuals, for example, who have been fined by the Chinese government for breaking the law, and previously the Chinese government had no way of collecting the fines. So one thing it will do is it will block the person from getting on a flight if they don't book they don't pay your fine. Well, in the United States, you don't pay your fine, you go to jail. That's a little harsher. But yes, the social credit system, if you have been fined by the Chinese government for breaking the law, they'll prevent you from booking a flight or booking a train until you pay it. But it's not what they make it out to be. The reports in American media about this social credit system, and thank you, Third Rail, are far bigger and far more exaggerated than anything that's actually happening in China. They're just over-the-top exaggerations everywhere you go. If you buy alcohol, that affects your score, and then if you say a cuss word in China, that's not true. It's not true. But it's projection. It's classic projection. Because why is it? Why is it that Instagram and Facebook are so bad for the mental health of young people? Why? Because it forces them to constantly be comparing themselves to other people. It forces them to be constantly checking about whether or not they are good enough. It creates a social credit system where young people are being judged by how many Twitter followers they have, how many likes they get on their posts, how many Instagram shares they get. It creates a situation where young people are constantly being subject to oversight. The oversight of their peers, the oversight of society, the oversight of anonymous people on the internet they've never met before, where you're constantly seeking the approval of others. Am I good looking enough? Am I doing well enough? Am I politically right way? Am I saying the right things? Am I doing the right things? Where you're constantly going and getting the approval of other people, constantly being given a rating, constantly being judged, constantly comparing yourself to other people. And that is creating a huge amount of mental health problems. People always compare themselves to other people. People always compare themselves to other people. People always judge other people. That's always gone on. In fact, human beings define ourselves in relation to other people. It's how other people see you, how other people react to you is a pretty big part of how we human beings define ourselves. But regardless of all of that, it's awful for young people's mental health to constantly be comparing themselves to other people. And this constant rating of people, constant measurement of people, this is what employers do. It's not what the Chinese government does. This is what employers do. I don't know. I've worked at many different places in my life. I've had many different jobs. I worked at a gas station at one point. I've worked at an insurance firm. I worked as a maintenance worker at my college. I've worked in many different jobs. And many different employers will constantly be rating people, right? You get a review where your employer says, I give you 4 stars in this area, and I give you 5 stars in this area, but in this area you get 2 stars. In this area you get 1.5 stars. And many people hate this. They find it to be very degrading to have to kind of grovel before their employer and get a rating, right? Most of us, we go to work, we do our job, we go home. If our employer has a problem, tell us what the problem is. We'll make you happy, but don't put us through this process of, are you doing good enough? And in many cases, right, it's blatantly exploitive, right? When I was a gas station attendant, we got a rating based on how many items of candy we sold. When people would come in to pay for their gas, we had to constantly try to upsell them and get them to buy candy because our rating would be based on how much candy we sold to people. And it was, you're constantly driving people to do what the employer wants to do, constantly rating them, constantly giving them a rating. These are mechanisms of social control. And this is how the capitalist wants his employees to be, constantly struggling to make more money for the capitalist, constantly improving, constantly becoming more productive for the employer, constantly rendering more profits. And the employer, the capitalist, sees you as a commodity, right? Your labor is a commodity, and he sees you as a commodity. Is this person, am I maximizing the value I'm getting out of them? Am I getting the most bang for my buck? I'm paying them $5 an hour, $10 an hour. Am I making enough money in return? Is this worth the return on my investment? This is capitalism. This is capitalism. This is capitalism. And this is how the capitalist sees the worker. And this is the ideal state of being for the capitalist, right? If he can constantly have the person monitoring themselves. Am I doing well enough? That the person is constantly seeking the approval of the employer, constantly striving to do what the employer says they want to do. Writing it down. Constantly trying to do that, constantly striving for the approval of the boss. This is capitalism. This is capitalism. This isn't the Chinese government. This isn't the Russian government. Right? This isn't Venezuela. This isn't Cuba. This isn't George Orwell's 1984. This is capitalism. This is capitalism. This is how capitalism is managing us, and this is how capitalism is destroying the lives of young people in the United States by subjecting them to the constant self-measurement, by subjecting them to the constant judgment, the constant comparison. This is how capitalism and the drive to make profits is destroying the next generation. This is capitalism. And these Republican congresspersons who talk about family values and young people and all of that, they really ought to think about what they preach about free markets, libertarianism, and They really ought to look into it, because it's capitalism that is the root of this problem. This is not what the Chinese government is doing. This is not what the social credit system is. This is capitalism. This is how capitalism is managing the rabble. And that's been a recurring theme on these lives. I've talked about the entrepreneurial bourgeoisie that have a more libertarian perspective, and the entrenched Eastern establishment, the Anglo-American Eastern establishment, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Carnegies, the Council on Foreign Relations, and their alliance with the Silicon Valley fascists, Mark Zuckerberg, whose hero is the Emperor of Rome, Caesar Augustus. His hero is Caesar Augustus, who ruled the entire world, Pax Romana. Bill Gates and his drive to reduce the human population. There are different wings within the American power structure. There is the lower level capitalists that support Trump, My Pillow, Mike Lindell, and Betsy DeVos, and fracking companies. And then there's the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and the DuPonts and the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Bill Gates, and the Trump wing favor unregulated free markets, and they are obsessed with economic growth, whereas the Bill Gates and the Rockefellers and the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Silicon Valley fascists, they're more interested in managing. They're not so interested in economic growth as they are in controlling and managing things and keeping the world as it is so they stay at the top of the pyramid. This is a divide between the entrepreneurial bourgeoisie and the managerial bourgeoisie. Ecology. Gardening. This is a divide. And that you could say that during the Reagan years, and especially in the 1990s and even up into the 2000s with Bush, this lower level bourgeoisie kind of had the upper hand. Right? The Soviet Union had fallen. They were engaging in neoliberalism. The economy was much better than it is. And there was kind of unity among the bourgeoisie. And the more libertarian elements kind of had the upper hand. Right? Privatizations were going on, liberalism, cutback, etc. But as capitalism began to enter a crisis, the most blatant example being the financial meltdown of 2008, 2009, social media emerged. MySpace first, that was the first big app I remember everyone had, and then Facebook. I remember I was on Facebook back when you had to have a college email address. You had to have an email address that ended in .edu to have a Facebook. Do folks remember that? At first, when Facebook started, you had to have .edu after your name to even get on there. Now, not anymore. That's ancient history. But with Facebook, with social media, suddenly, gradually, that managerial bourgeoisie had the upper hand. Especially coming out of the financial crisis. There was fear that there might be some kind of social explosion. There might be some new revolutionary movement or rebellion among working people. And so in response to their new innovation of managing people with social media, was the managerial bourgeoisie that started to have the upper hand. Right? In the struggle between the Eastern establishment, the Yankee and Cowboy War that Carl Oglesby talks about, the Eastern establishment with Obama and with Facebook, they had the upper hand. And one thing that significantly contributed to giving the upper hand to the Eastern establishment has been Netflix. Netflix, the TV, you can watch TV shows. It started out Netflix would send you DVDs in the mail. Right? That was a thing. You got DVDs in the mail. But then Netflix turned into this TV on demand service. Barack Obama is on Netflix. The board and Netflix was pushing politics. And it was liberal politics largely. Netflix did a lot to expose police brutality. They did a whole show about about the killing of Oscar Grant. Right? They did Fruitville Station. Netflix has been somewhat liberal in the way that they put things out. But Netflix is definitely, it's not a market entity. It's not about making money, right? It's technically a private company. People make money from Netflix, but it's a monopoly. It's a monopoly, and it's more about engineering. It's more about controlling people. It's more about pushing certain political messages. Netflix is an absolute monopoly, practically. I mean, I guess you can watch Amazon video stream or whatever. U.S. cities. Netflix has an agenda. Definitely has an agenda. The Trump folks hate Netflix because they see it as more in line with the liberal bourgeoisie. They've tried to develop their own alternatives with little success. Obama is on Netflix. And, you know, we have Netflix in my house. My wife watches a lot of Netflix. I don't. I rarely have time to watch television. But when we do, often my wife and I, we don't like the same kind of television. We don't like the same kind of TV. Right? My wife likes those police shows. I cannot stand police shows, having gone to court with police brutality victims over and over and over again in Cleveland, seeing how these things really work. I can't watch police shows. My wife likes them. If you like them, I respect that. I cannot watch police shows. I hate them. I vehemently hate them because I know the reality of how rigged our criminal justice system is. But regardless, you know, every so often, my wife and I will find a show that we can agree on. It's rare, but it happens. It happens, right? And I like political stuff. My wife doesn't like that. I always want to watch political stuff, documentaries. Right? She doesn't want to watch that. So it's rare that we will find something we can agree on. She likes the cop shows, the thrillers. I like she likes rom-coms too. I don't particularly care for rom-coms. I like all this political stuff that kind of bores her. She doesn't care for. But every so often we can find a show that we can agree on. Every so often, and it's a miracle. And I'm always urging. It's kind of funny. She wants to sit there and watch everything. She just wants to sit there and, wants to watch another one and another one. But I'm trying to stop it because I'm trying to prolong us having a show we can agree on. Because once it's over, it's over. And it's funny. I'm always like, we watched one. Okay, let's wait. No, but she wants to watch it. She wants to watch it till it's done. She wants to binge watch, and I want to ration it out. It's very funny. But one of the shows that my wife and I have been able to agree on, which I must say, politics aside, and I've talked about it on here before, is a show called The Good Place. Right? The premise of the show is that this woman has died. She's gone to the afterlife. She's gone to heaven, which is the good place. The bad place is hell. She goes to the good place, it's called. But they have her confused with someone else. That's the premise of the show. Now, it gets much more complicated from there. I mean, we're not even done with it, right? There's like 4 seasons. We're in the 3rd season. So many twists and turns. And it's a good program, honestly. I don't agree with it. I don't agree with the message that it's putting out largely, but it's a well-made program. It's a well-made program, right? It's entertaining. Makes you think. It's whatever. I don't agree with it, though. And that's the thing. I'm not going to be engineered. I'm not going to be engineered by it. I don't agree with it, but it's entertaining, right? It's a creative premise for a show, and perhaps maybe that's a strength that Netflix has, perhaps, right? The fact that, I doubt, if you went to ABC or NBC and you pitched a show like The Good Place, as complicated and convoluted, and, they would probably turn it down because it would be too much of a risk, right? But that's kind of the beauty of something like Netflix or PBS, right? Is that you can do experimental things that the market may not reward because you have that ability, because you're not market bound. And because Netflix seems to be this kind of virtual monopoly that's engaging in social engineering, trying to regulate us, they're not bound necessarily by the free market obsession that you have in different places. So, they're able to take the show in different directions and all of that. And that's to their credit. And like I said, it's entertaining. But here's my main problem with the show. Here's my main problem with the show. My main problem with The Good Place, right? I ranted about it before after watching like the first episode, but now after having seen almost all the show, we're on like the third season. There's 4 seasons. I'm going to tell you my main fundamental disagreement with the show, which is that the premise on the show that continues to show up throughout the program, it's a recurring theme, is that in their version of life after death, It's a lot like Instagram. It's a lot like Facebook. It's a lot like your employer. People are constantly being... It's a point system, according to the fictionalized afterlife of the show. There's a point system. For every good deed that you do, you get so many points. For every bad deed that you do, you lose so many points. And where you go after you die, heaven or hell, the good place or the bad place, is determined by your score when you die. It's based on your score. That's basically a recurring theme on the show, that whether or not you go to heaven or hell is based on a mathematical calculation, adding up your good deeds and your bad deeds. And if you've gotten the right amount of points when you die, you go to the good place. And if you've not gotten the right amount of points, then you go to the bad place. That's a recurring theme. There's no spoiler alert. I'm not ruining anything for you on the show. That's a recurring theme. And in there, they're presenting the world to people like Instagram, like Facebook. Right? You're constantly being rated. You're constantly being approved by other people. You're constantly being compared to others. You're constantly getting a rating. And they are projecting the reality that is killing Zoomers, killing millennials, driving them to opioids, driving them to self-doubt, driving them to hopelessness. It's projecting this kind of social media reality, this rating like you get from your employer. How profitable are you? Land back. It's comparing that rating. It's projecting that onto the universe. And it's very funny because we just came out with this book, Jesus is a Socialist. Right? This book is now available. It's the latest book from the Center for Political Innovation. The Center for Political Innovation is not a religious organization. There are atheists in the group. There are Jews in the group. There are Muslims in the group. There are Christians like myself in the group. But we published this book to stimulate a conversation. That's why we published this book. But this book, making the argument that Christianity and socialism are compatible, small handheld book, it was the latest book that we published. But in order to put this book together, myself and Keaton Mansfield were forced to do a large amount of research. We were forced to do some reading, some studying, to make sure that we got it right. And it's very funny. Very, very, very funny. Because in the course of putting this book together, I remembered and recalled something that I had been told many times throughout my youth, throughout my Christian upbringing, which is this: there is no point system. An essential part of the Christian faith is that there is no point system. That is a big part of the Christian belief system, is there is no points. You don't go to heaven or hell based on your deeds. In fact, that's considered to be one of the great apostasies, right? The Catholic Church burned people at the stake for saying that. There were people in the year 500 who were saying, oh, you go to heaven based on how good you are. And they said, nope, and they burned him at the stake for that. And that was long. It is considered to be one of the biggest deviations of the Christian faith. The idea that you go to heaven if you do so many good deeds, you go to hell if you do so many bad. No, that is actually considered to be one of the biggest deviations, the biggest distortions of the Christian faith. And it is explicitly, if you read especially the final books of the Bible, the epistles, right, the letters, the Apostle Paul wrote, that he spends over and over again reassuring everyone that your deeds, your actions have nothing to do with whether or not you receive salvation or not. So the good place is pushing something that is entirely contrary to the entire teachings of Christianity from the beginning, right? Ephesians chapter 2, verse 4 through 10, he says, like the rest, we were by nature deserving of wrath. But because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even though we were dead in transgressions. It is by grace that you have been saved, and God has raised us up with Christ and seated us with him in the heavenly realms in Jesus Christ, in order that the coming age he might show the incomparable riches of his grace, expressed in the kindness to us in Jesus Christ. For it is by the grace that you have been saved through faith, and not through yourselves. It is through the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ to do good works, which God prepared for us in advance to do. Right? 2 Timothy 1 through 9, he says, he saved us and called us to a holy life, not because of anything we have done, but because of our own purpose and grace. This grace was given us by Christ Jesus for the beginning of time. Now, I'm not on here to preach a sermon. This isn't really about religion. But it's interesting. It's very, very, very interesting. Very, very, very interesting. Very, very, very interesting that Netflix is pushing something so contrary to what the Christian religion preaches, but so in line with how Facebook and Instagram is engineering us and causing so many problems for the next generation. Now, generally, and this is where I will disagree with mainstream Christianity, generally the way that this concept is taught by Christian pastors, and this is what I heard when I was growing up, is they say, well, all of us are sinners. All of us have violated and broken the rules. All of us are not good enough. If it was salvation by deeds, none of us would get into heaven, but Jesus died on the cross for our sins, and it's through God's mercy and grace that we all get to go to heaven, right? And if we can accept Jesus, if we say the magic words, right? If you say, I accept Jesus, these magical words, then all of your sins go away and you go to heaven. Well, I'm at the point where my beliefs say I don't think that's right. I think we're getting at something different here. I think there's something else. There's something else. Something else that the scripture is getting at. And it's my life experience. My experience interacting with people that tells me this. But in order to get this point, because it's not a simple point, not a simple point at all, I'm going to talk to you about Mao in China. Mao Zedong, the leader of the Chinese Revolution. Someone that I've studied in great depth. Someone who will be remembered as one of the most important human beings in history. Mao Zedong, the founder of the Chinese Revolution. The first interview that Mao ever gave, the first interview he ever gave, was in 1937. Mao gave an interview, a lengthy interview, to an American writer named Edgar Snow. Edgar Snow was from Missouri, and he was from Missouri. He was a journalist from Missouri. He went to the Missouri School of Journalism, and he learned to speak Chinese, and he went to live in China. In 1928, he witnessed a horrendous famine where people were starving to death en masse, and in the late 1930s, Edgar Snow was dispatched to go up into the mountains to track down this legendary figure called Mao, right? In all the newspapers in the Chinese cities, they didn't even give Mao a name. They called the army that Mao led, they called it the Red Bandit Army. The Red Bandit Army. But as it looked like there might be a war with Japan, as there was increasing interest from American intelligence agencies in who Mao and the Red Bandit Army were, Edgar Snow apparently went to some Russian professors, and he got some coded messages and invisible ink and all kinds of crazy stuff. He finally arranged to go and interview Mao Zedong, the founder of the Chinese Revolution. He went up into the mountains and one place to another place. And finally, he got to Mao's camp. and he interviewed Mao. He interviewed Mao Zedong, the founder of the Chinese Revolution. And he found this camp where Mao, the leader of the Chinese Revolution, was living. And he found Mao to be a very humble guy. The first time he met Mao, as Mao was talking to him, Mao started itching. And in the middle of the first conversation that Edgar Snow had with Mao, Mao took his pants off and began checking for lice. That's Mao. And Edgar Snow looked on and couldn't believe it. He said, could you imagine Mussolini taking his pants off? Could you imagine Winston Churchill or Stalin taking his pants off in the middle of an interview? But that was who Mao was. Mao lived in a cave. And in his cave, he had a box. And he sat on that box to put his boots on. And he had a cot that he slept on. And Mao lived a very humble life up there in the mountains. And Edgar Snow proceeded to interview Mao, the leader of the Red Bandit Army, in 1937. And Mao lived in this cave with his wife, with an army of thousands of people up in the mountains. And he interviewed Mao. And Mao's sitting there with his wife, and he's interviewing Mao. And he asks Mao about his childhood and his upbringing. And so Mao tells the story. He grew up in a middle-class peasant family, went to the university, got interested in communism, blah, blah, blah. But what's interesting is as Mao is telling his life story, Mao's wife sits up abruptly and is listening to all of this intently, very, very intently. And after the interview is over, Edgar Snow finds out that the reason that Mao's wife was so interested in hearing her husband's life story is because she had never heard it before. She had never heard it before. Mao's wife had never heard her husband's life story before. And this is what you need to understand. And this is what Netflix isn't getting. This is what evangelical Christians are not getting. She had never heard that story before. Because one of the rules that they had at the Red Army camp is that you didn't talk about your old life. In fact, when you came to the Red Army camp, you got a new name. You left your old life and your old name behind. You got a new name. When you were a communist, you got a new name. You got a new name, and you didn't talk about your old life. You didn't talk about your family. You didn't talk about your school. You didn't talk about the neighborhood you came from. In fact, you didn't even use your old name. You had a new name, you had a new life, and you were a communist. And so from the rank and file soldiers all the way up to the leader of the Chinese Communist Party, Mao, nobody talked about their old life. Nobody. It was against the rules. But what did they do? They sang. They sang all the time. They had all kinds of communist songs. They had rewritten every traditional Chinese song. They had rewritten it to be about communism. And while they were in this army camp, while they were fighting to build a new China, while they were going out on the battlefield and giving their lives for the revolution, they didn't think about their old life. They didn't even think about their old name, but they sang constantly. They filled the air with communist songs. And that was a kind of power that scared the living hell out of the Japanese. And it scared the living hell out of Chiang Kai-shek. And it scared the living hell out of the Americans. There was something happening in the mountains, in those army camps, that made the Chinese Red Army more powerful than any other army in the world at that time. And early on, people were obsessed with this. People were obsessed with it. There's even a Hollywood movie called Gung Ho. I'm glad you bought it. Glad you like it, Adam. There's even a Hollywood movie called Gung Ho that portrays a U.S. Marine Corps general who studied with Mao's 8th Route Army and uses some of the techniques of Mao's 8th Route Army to build a U.S. Marine Corps division to fight the Japanese. The Japanese couldn't understand. They could not understand what Mao was doing. Chiang Kai-shek could not understand what Mao was doing. And after the Korean War was over, the American media and American intelligence was terrified and could not understand what Mao was doing. It was so utterly amazing. Like, people would be so devoted to communism, to building a new China, so devoted to it, so fanatical, so willing to lay down their lives for a cause. That Red Army was unstoppable. This is where the term brainwashing comes from. Did you know this? Right, the term brainwashing became popular in the 1950s in the United States because they were trying to understand how is it that Mao and the Chinese communists were able to, win so many people, to sacrifice everything, to fight so hard for their country, against the imperialists, to build socialism. And they came up with this term brainwashing because they said the communists, they must be brainwashing people. The CIA started a program called Project MK Ultra, trying to figure out methods of brainwashing people like those Chinese communists were able to do. It was something that people had never seen before. It was something utterly amazing, and it was something that scared the crap out of the imperialists. It's something the whole world was in awe of. But what's interesting is many of the people who visited Mao's camp, they said things like it reminded them of early Christianity. I believe Anna Louise Strong, Edgar Snow, they said it reminded them of early Christianity. It reminded them of the book of Acts in the Bible. It reminded them of religious fanaticism, the level of loyalty, the level of devotion that Chinese communists had. It reminded them of something that they had only seen before among religious adherents. A level of dedication, a level of fanaticism, a level of willingness to sacrifice. And this is what I think many of the young folks who are suffering on Instagram, suffering on Facebook, this is what I think that many of the Christian pastors who talk about salvation through grace, this is what I think many people who don't particularly like what I have to say, this is what I think many adherents to Western liberalism do not understand. I am going to point you toward a truth that may not go over easy. It may not be something that you want to hear, but I don't care. I'm not on here to tell you what you want to hear. I am on here to tell you what you need to hear. The second I start pandering, the second I start trying to tell you what I think will be popular, the second I start saying abolish billionaires, the second I start saying deport all white people from the United States, the second that I start shilling for the Democratic Party, the second I start calling people in red states Nazis, at that point you'll know that I'm not me anymore. I'm not on here to try and get popular. I'm not on here to try and tell you what you want to hear, what's going to get me some points with BreadTube, what's going to get me a higher rating in the algorithms. I am not here to do that. If I was on here to be popular, to become an influencer, to be the next Vosh, I would talk very differently. But I don't do that. I do not do that because I have a responsibility. I have a responsibility to do something better than that. I have a responsibility to give you something that you don't have. I have a responsibility to add something to the conversation that is desperately missing in our time. That is my responsibility. And I don't care. I do not care if people don't want to hear this. I don't care if it gets me canceled or unpopular. I don't care. I am here to tell you what must be said. And I'm going to tell you this. And if you don't want to hear it, if you're not ready to hear it, that's fine. You may not be ready to hear what I'm about to say. You may be offended by what I'm about to say. You may have a negative reaction to what I'm about to say. I don't care. If you're struggling right now, if you're a young American living in the center of the empire, this is what you need to hear. And if you're able to hear this, you will be happier. Your life will improve. And if you're not able to hear this, I can't help you. I'm not going to go away. I'm still here. But if you're not able to hear this, I mean, you might as well get help from somebody else because this is what I can offer you. I can also offer you political insights and jokes and, education and analysis. But in terms of helping you be happy, I'm not a mental health professional, definitely not a pastor, definitely not a clergyman, definitely not a spiritual teacher. I, Caleb, a guy on social media, a reporter, a communist, a writer, I can offer you this. This is what I can offer you. And if you don't want it, don't take it. And if you do want it, it'll help you. This is what I can offer you. So here we go. And it's not like a simple thing. I could just tell it to you. I have to explain it. Everything deserves context. So I told you about how Mao told his life story to Edgar Snow. And Edgar Snow listened. And his wife listened intently because she had never heard it before. I just told you that. Well, now we're going to get back to this. Right? I have many times quoted to you all Matthew 10, verses 34 through 39. Do not suppose that I've come to bring peace to the earth, because I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. I've come to turn a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. Anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. And whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. I've quoted that many times. But Jesus says something else. In the book of Luke, what does Jesus say? This is what it says, Luke 14, 25 through 27. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, Such a person cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. What in the world is he talking about here? It's really funny, right? What is one thing that evangelical Christians are always talking about? Family values. Family values, right? That's what they're always talking about, family values. Well, I mean, didn't Jesus say, if anyone comes to me and does not hate their mother and father, wife, children, and brothers and sisters? That doesn't sound like family values to me, right? When he says, I've come to turn a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, man's enemies are those of his own household. That does not sound like family values, now does it? That sounds kind of the opposite of family values, now doesn't it? Right? If Jesus was coming here to tell everyone to be a wholesome conservative Christian and homeschool their kids, and that's not what it sounds like. That is definitely not what that sounds like. But what is he actually saying there? Right? Some people read this and they say, well, Jesus was a cult leader. That sounds like a cult. He wanted everyone to abandon their families and give up everything and follow him. Some people read this and say Jesus was a real selfish MFer, right? Jesus was a real selfish motherfucker, right? He wants everyone to just, totally be devoted to him. No other friends, no other family. Well, no, that's not what it means. I am telling you based on my life experience what this means, right? And it doesn't mean Jesus was Jim Jones and wanted everyone to drink the Kool-Aid and die. And it doesn't mean that that Jesus Christ was a big narcissist and no, that's not what it means at all. I'm going to tell you what it means. It means that if you want to be happy, if you want to have a rewarding life, if you want to be at peace with the universe, you have to give up yourself. You have to stop being you. Think about who it is you are, right? You're Bob, you're Jane, your mom and dad are so-and-so, you have this as a job, you have this income, you have to stop being you. You will never be happy if you are you. You have to stop being you. And that's the curse of Instagram. And that's the curse of Facebook. And that's the curse of all of this. You will never be happy as long as you are you. As long as you are Jane or Bob, whose parents are so-and-so, whose brothers and sisters are so-and-so, whose job is so-and-so, who makes so-and-so much money, and in comparison to so-and-so and has this high-ranking score and so-and-so, as long as that's who you are, as long as that's how you define yourself, you won't be happy. The way to be happy is to stop being you. The way to be happy is to stop being you. When you stop being you, you stop being your Facebook, you stop being your Instagram, you stop being your bank account, you stop being your job, you stop being your family, you stop being your school, you stop being your community. When you stop being you, you can be happy. And when you stop being you, you can save the world. When you stop being you and you become a revolutionary and you become a communist and you devote yourself to this and you live for this and you push the you out of your mind, when you push you out of your mind, when Bob, when Jane, when Steve, when you can push that out of your mind, But instead, you become a revolutionary. You become a Marxist. You become someone willing to fight and die for the revolution. You become somebody who understands Marxism-Leninism. You become part of the project to change human history. You become part of history's challenge. When you stop being you, when you start pushing you out and start pushing the revolution in, when you kill the part of you that wants to be you, and you let the revolutionary within yourself blossom, you can be happy. And you can find what Christians would consider to be salvation. When you connect yourself to the forces of good in the universe, when you push your own body, your own selfish needs, your own selfish desire, your own individualism, your own ranking, your own comparison to other people, when you get out of the rat race, when you stop competing, when you say, I'm done with me, you can be happy. Now that might sound wacky, that might sound bizarre, that might sound like something insane, and that might sound like something that you don't want to hear. And like I said, I don't care. But this is my experience. This is my experience. This is how I have found happiness in life. I remember how I first really got into communism. I was a preteen. I was mildly interested in communism. Didn't really know much about it, was mildly interested. Was reading about it. Started telling people I was a democratic socialist. I was 11 or 12. Didn't really know much about it. Cracked open the Communist Manifesto. Couldn't make heads or tails of it. Couldn't make heads or tails of it. Didn't know what they were talking about. But it was interesting. It seemed kind of like common sense to some degree or other, right? All these problems, environmental problems. Well, capitalists are making profits, right? Oh, we're having wars. That's the military-industrial complex. Corporations are making profits. Why don't we just get rid of profits? Why don't we just have an economy that's not centered around greed and people making profits? It just kind of seemed like common sense. But everyone said it failed everywhere it had ever been tried. And, I was tinkering around with different ideas. Was trying to just be a normal kid with a normal life, normal parents, normal children, normal brother, normal school, middle of the United States. That was me. But then 9/11 happened. And after 9/11, things in my town got rather intense. A lot of patriotic assemblies, a lot of military stuff in school, a lot of pro-war stuff. And I was against the Iraq War. Basically, my town kind of turned into a 24/7 pro-war flag-waving rally, and I didn't quite identify with that. So I started to more intensely study Marxism, and study anti-imperialism. I started to get more into this stuff. My family was not particularly thrilled that I was doing this. They didn't particularly like that I was doing that. They thought I was embarrassing the family. They thought I was crazy. They thought I was a problem. They were constantly telling me to shut up about this stuff. Don't talk about this. Don't let other people hear you. People are going to think you're a terrorist. People are going to think you're anti-American. But I studied this stuff. And I'll tell you, I'll never forget the day. I was 15 years old. I went to a communist bookstore in Cleveland. My mother had dropped me off. She said, do not leave the store. So there was a book discussion going on at this communist bookstore. And the book discussion ended. One of the communists came up to me put his hand on my shoulder and handed me a big stack of newspapers. And said, all right, we're going to go sell the paper. And I was like, you got to be joking, right? You got to be joking, right? I mean, you've got to be joking. You can't be serious. Nope, we're going to go sell the paper. And I was thinking, you want me to walk up to people I do not know and try to convince them to pay me actual money for a newspaper about communism. And they're like, yep, that's what we're doing. So, 15-year-old me went out on the streets of Cleveland Heights. Sold communist newspapers. And it was very difficult at first. I could barely get the words out. I was stuttering the words out. You want a newspaper about communism. It was terrifying. First newspaper I sold, I was wearing my athletic jacket. The guy saw the big O on my jacket because I'm from Orrville, Ohio. And he said, well, I don't agree with communism, young man, but you go to Oberlin, so I'll buy your newspaper. Gave me $1, and I gave him a communist newspaper. Let's speed up. I went to college. When I was in college, I was much more actively involved in communist groups. I discovered I was quite good at selling newspapers. But the person that my college wanted me to be and the person that I wanted to be did not match. In college, I often wrote papers for college and didn't get very good grades on them. And they would tell me, you're writing too simply. That was one criticism I often got in college. You're writing too simply. You use too short sentences. You're not complex enough in how you explain it. Why? Because I was trying to learn to write in a very clear and coherent way. But my college was trying to teach me to write like an academic. My family didn't particularly want me to become the person I was becoming. I was writing articles for communist newspapers. I was going to protest against police brutality. I was working with labor union organizations, working with prisoners at the Ohio death row. My family didn't particularly like who I was becoming. After college, I had a bit of a difficult time finding employment. I would work at a gas station. I would get fired because I was spacey. I wasn't paying enough attention to things. I sold my blood plasma. That I used to do. I used to go to the plasma clinic, sell my blood plasma for money. Worked at call centers. I was pretty good at doing call centers. That was something I could do. I wasn't happy. Then, on my birthday, December 2010, I got on a Greyhound bus and I came to New York City. Came to New York City. My family didn't want me to go. I didn't care. I thought I was coming to this city for a month. Haven't left since. Got on the Greyhound bus and I came to New York City. And I'm not going to get into specifics. There's a lot more I could say that I am not going to say because I'm going to maintain my privacy and because it's not important. It's not about me. There were a lot of things going on in my life at that point that were not good. There were a lot of things that had happened in my life in the lead up to that point that were not good. first came to New York City, this is a tough city to live in. You think it was tough to live in Cleveland at the time of the financial crisis. This city can be pretty tough. There's a lot of opportunity here, but it's also very, very tough in this city. But I was very dedicated. I made a decision that communism is where I'm at. I'm not going to be me. I left myself behind. I gave myself to this. I gave myself to this. And I discovered, with everything that was going on, with everything that was happening, as difficult as things were, I discovered that I could start to find peace by giving myself to this. I started memorizing communist speeches, communist paragraphs, communist writings, and reciting them to myself over and over again. Do you know that? It's why I'm able to end these live streams by saying a new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. The danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, but revolution is the main trend in the world today. The reason I'm able to recite that is because I started memorizing these things. I also memorized the people of a small country can surely defeat aggression by a big country. That only if they dare to rise in struggle. This is a law of history. I started reciting those phrases to myself, and I discovered about how words can give you power. When you memorize things, when you are facing difficulty, you can begin reciting these phrases to yourself. When the world seems difficult, you can start reciting these phrases to yourself. You can drown out the evils of this world by reciting these phrases to yourself. Words can give you power. Words can give you power. I've told this story before, and I will tell this story again. I remember during the Occupy Wall Street protests when I had long hair. I had long hair and a beard. You've probably seen the pictures. Make fun of me all you want. But that was a good look for Occupy. Not so much a good look for other things I've done since, but it was a good look for Occupy. I had long hair and a beard. One day we had a demonstration on Wall Street, a march at Occupy Wall Street called Wall Street is War Street. That was the name of our demonstration. Beautiful banner, Wall Street is War Street. We were trying to get the Occupy Wall Street people to do more to oppose the bombing of Libya. And so we went. There was a truck that had all our signs and all our banners on it. We drove to the corner of Wall Street where there's a church, right near the park where Occupy Wall Street was. There's a church called Trinity Church. Right next to this church, I think it's called Trinity Church, this truck dropped me off, and I was to stand there and wait while the truck parked and other people brought their signs. So I'm standing in front of the church holding a bundle of signs on a public sidewalk near Occupy Wall Street. I'm standing there on the corner by Trinity Church, and this security guard came out of the church. Keep in mind, I was on a public street. And I'm standing there with some signs. I'm not even holding them up. They're like bundled with some signs. Standing there waiting for the truck to be parked, other protesters to come. Waiting for this Wall Street is War Street demonstration. You can probably find video or images of this protest. A lot of people took videos. I think it was in a rap video by like Immortal Technique or somebody. They showed this demonstration. You can probably see me in that video from an angle at least. So anyway, I'm standing there on the corner. And this security guard walks up to me. Walks on over to me. You can't be here. You're blocking the sidewalk. You can't be here. You can't be here. She's yelling at me. You're not allowed to be here. She's shouting at me. All of a sudden, this feeling came over me. Because I knew I had to stay there, because that's where people were meeting me. I couldn't move. I knew also that this woman was not a police officer. She had no authority to arrest me. She was a private security guard from inside of the Trinity Church. I also realized that I was standing on a public sidewalk. And so, in that moment, I just spaced out. It was like she wasn't there. It's like she wasn't there. I just stood there and looked straight past her. It was like she didn't exist. I was standing there holding these signs, looking ahead, and she was in front of me. Can't you hear me? You're not allowed to be here. You gotta move. You gotta move. And I just stood there with this blank look in my eyes. She was yelling, you gotta move. You're blocking the street. And I'm just... And she couldn't do anything at that point. She couldn't do anything at that point. She wasn't a cop. She couldn't arrest me. She definitely couldn't touch me. Security guards are told they generally can't put their hands on you. At that moment, when I didn't acknowledge her, when I pretended that she wasn't there, when I erased her from my reality, she was completely powerless. She had no power over me at that point. She didn't exist for me. Because I had given myself over to something stronger, something far more powerful. I had given myself over to something that I carried inside of me. It was far more powerful than she was. She was noise. She was a flicker in my eyelids. She didn't exist. And that is how you can find happiness. That is how you can find salvation. That is how you can become a revolutionary. Maybe this doesn't make any sense to you. Maybe you haven't lived it. Maybe this sounds like incoherent gibberish. I don't care. Again, I'm not expecting to win an award for this live stream. You know, eventually I got on a ship, risked my life trying to get to Yemen. And the port we were supposed to go to was bombed 8 times in a single day. We saw American fighter aircraft above our ship. It created an international incident. U.S. media and Israeli media was alleging that we were smuggling weapons to Yemen. And we weren't. The UN Relief Works Agency unloaded our ship and saw that we were not smuggling weapons. But I was on a ship in the Gulf of Aden trying to get to Yemen, the only American on board with a French citizen and a German citizen and a lot of Iranians. And the Israelis and the Saudis were openly talking about attacking our ship. And they bombed the port where we were headed 8 times in a single day. 2 days later, they bombed the medical university where we would have delivered our medical supplies. How did I do that? How did I do that? I'm telling you, I did that because I stopped being me. I stopped being me. I gave myself to something bigger. I stopped being a guy from Orrville, Ohio. I stopped being a guy who graduated from this high school. I stopped being this guy who did this or that. I stopped being me. And that has given me the strength. There are a lot of people that say, how do you keep doing it, Caleb? Where does your energy come from? You don't do anything but this. You don't do anything but this. How do you not burn out? Right? Thank you, Neil. Thank you very much. They say, how do you not burn out? How do you not burn out, Caleb? How do you stop? You not stop doing this, right? There's people that do this for 1 or 2 years, but then they move on. How do you not burn out? I'll tell you, I burn out because I don't burn out because the part of me that burns out is gone. The part of me that burns out is gone. The part of me that would burn out, that would get tired, that would get bored of all of this, that would get exhausted, that would want to go drink at the bar and want to go dance in the club and, want to go do ecstasy and that part of me is gone. That part of me is long gone. I'm not that anymore. I'm not my body anymore. I have a body, right? But that's not who I am anymore. I gave that part of myself up. I gave myself to something higher. I make mistakes. I've made some mistakes since then. I've made mistakes more recently. I do things I regret. Sometimes I'll say something and wish I hadn't said it. Sometimes I'll do something and wish I hadn't done it. But that's not the point. The point is the way I'm able to keep going. The way I'm able to not get caught up and not be in a bad place, which I have been in some bad places in my life. I don't want to get into specifics about it. The way that I was able to not get into the trap that so many of these young folks who get caught up in Instagram and Facebook and depression and loneliness, the way that I didn't get caught in the trap that so many people our age are stuck in. The way that I have continued doing what I do is because I discovered what Mao discovered, what Edgar Snow discovered in the mountains. I discovered what other folks were talking about. I've connected to something. I've connected to something bigger. And that's what keeps me going. And I hope this is helpful to you. I hope it's helpful to you. It may be helpful to you, it may not be. You may have been ready to hear this, you may have not been ready to hear this. This may have scared you away, this may have helped you understand me. I don't care. I do care. I care about you. You're a valued member of my community, but I'm not afraid to say what needs to be said, and I'm going to say it regardless of how people react. And those are my opening remarks for tonight. I've had that rant inside of me for a long time. It's been building up. I was looking for the right words. Those are my opening remarks for tonight.